We'll just see if we can get that working. We need a bit of amplification with the sound, Vesna.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks so much for coming along to our Professional Development Day today. It's so great to see so many archivists interested in the subject of exhibitions. My name is Dr. Mark Brogan. I'm the Acting Convener and Program Coordinator for the ASA, so if you're meeting me for the first time, great, it's so nice to see you. Exhibitions to me, when I was a practicing archivist, which goes back a few years, were easily one of the most satisfying experiences that I had as an archivist. Basically, exhibitions are storytelling, and we all respond to and enjoy telling stories. But I also developed expertise in graphic design and production, things that were actually going to be important to me in other parts of my career. So this particular activity has many dimensions to it, and the knowledge base is interdisciplinary, and the skills that you develop can be deployed in many career contexts. So I'm sure today you're going to have a lot of fun in exploring exhibitions and bringing your own perspectives based on what you've done already. Just a couple of things from an ASA perspective. You'll find that in your package of materials today that we've supplied you with, you will have a lovely notebook, courtesy of NAA. Thank you, Vesna. And thank you to NAA for hosting today's event. It's wonderful. But you'll also have a feedback form. We'd like your view, not only about this professional development opportunity, but other topics that you might want to see us address in future professional development opportunities that we might run. Our current ambition is to run at least one per year, and this one's been quite successful, so we're quite keen to go forward with this. But without any further ado, I'll invite Vesna Liso, who's the manager of NAAWA, to give the acknowledgement of country and also to introduce our first speaker, Carina McPherson. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good morning and welcome. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you, Mark, for organising this Professional Development Day. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Carina is a curator and coordinator with over 10 years' experience in the cultural heritage sector, and is currently the curator and coordinator of exhibitions for the State Library. So Carina will be speaking about interpretation, planning, designing and producing exhibitions. Thank you everyone, have a great day, and welcome Carina.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Well, thank you very much, Vesna. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Dr. Mark Brogan, for having us all here today and for organising today's seminar. Okay, I'll just set up my slideshow. Let's go. Fantastic. So we're here to discuss interpretation as it relates to exhibitions in heritage and archives context. So we're all part of the GLAM sector. My experience has been mostly in libraries, a little bit at the WA Museum, and lots of different experiences obtained through my studies. So I'm here as a friend of archives, having worked in the library and archive sector for quite some time. So before we begin, I'd just like to reiterate thanks to Vesna for acknowledging our country today. So I just thought it was relevant to bring up this wonderful map, which is a map that's held both at the State Records Office and at the State Library. We've got a different edition or copy, and it's one of the earliest town site maps of Perth from 1838. And as you can see here, there's been a project which has more recently inscribed the original names of these places onto this city landscape. So you can see, the lakes. Perth, as I'm sure you would know, is known as the Great Lakes District. So the area of Northbridge, where we are, all surrounded by swampland once upon a time. So this is actually an interactive website which was developed by the it's now the Aboriginal Family History Unit, and they're based at the State Library as well. And so it's at the URL. You might like to explore it later. You can click on each of the Noongar names and learn a bit more about that place from the Noongar perspective. So it's a nice pinpoint to start, because it shows that we're always working with many different layers of history, and sometimes our archives and collections might only represent one layer of the story or one part of the story. And I think there's a really exciting challenge presented to us in this industry to help show many different sides of the story. And obviously the Noongar names of this local place is something that many people, unless you've grown up in an Indigenous family or a Noongar family, probably wouldn't know about. So it's one of the things that we can do to help communicate and elevate the many layers of history. Okay, so interpretation. Got some, I didn't expect that to pop up like that, but that's cool. Some nice transitions. So we're discussing interpretation of collections and archives as it especially relates to exhibitions and displays. So as you are aware, interpretation of collections comes in many different formats. And exhibitions are really a staple of access and engagement in our industry. So while we'll be focusing a lot on exhibitions as a format today, a lot of the ideas and methods that we'll be discussing can relate to any form of heritage interpretation. So be it a talk or a tour, or perhaps it's an online article or a website that you might be developing about your archive. So we'll be focusing on planning, designing and developing, and producing and delivering. But we'll spend most of our time in the planning phase because that's really where most of the work happens. Production and delivery can happen quite easily if we do most of the work in the planning phase. So I'm looking forward to taking you through these steps today. Is my volume okay? I've got quite a loud voice. That's great. Probably don't need the microphone. Okay, so definitions of heritage interpretation. It's quite a bit of a jargony term. But as you know, the definitions can vary quite a lot. So fundamentally, interpretation is communication with purpose. But wouldn't we say that every communication should have a purpose? Well, yes, every communication probably should have a purpose. But the difference with heritage interpretation is that it's more than just information transmission. It is about having revelation or creating revelation and insight based on that information transmission. So it's not information or facts alone. It's about how we craft those information and facts into stories, as Mark mentioned earlier. Okay. So the father of heritage interpretation, known as Friedman Tilden, described heritage interpretation as an educational activity which aims to reveal meanings and relationships through the use of original objects by first-hand experience and by illustrative media, rather than simply to communicate factual information. So he really hits the nail on the head there. Just a little bit of background if you're not aware of the history of interpretation, but interpretation as a concept developed in particularly around the US in the national parks movement, where they were looking to try and find ways to reach the community in an educative capacity, which actually encouraged them to care for the environments which they were walking and experiencing through. So it's about storytelling and key messaging. In my view, interpretation can be considered as a sub-discipline of engagement because it's about connecting collections and archives with audiences in meaningful ways. So my role at the State Library, even though I am curator and coordinator of projects, my title is to do with engagement because it's about connecting people with collections or archives. All right, next one. Okay, so this little table I've developed to show some examples of different types of heritage interpretation. So exhibitions and displays, we're all pretty familiar with what they look like and what they might involve. But there's many other types of interpretation here. So the ones highlighted in orange are ones that I've seen used in this GLAM sector and in small to medium museums and collecting institutions and small to medium archives. I'm just wondering if you could take a moment to have a read of that table, and can you make any comments or let me know, do any of these interpretation types surprise you, that they could be interpretation? Any thoughts? Crickets? Okay. Yeah, still reading, that's okay. Okay. Well,
I guess I think of podcasts as being primarily entertainment, or connect them with these kind of experiences.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a good point. Podcasts, of course, can certainly serve entertainment purposes, and probably the most of the podcasts that you'll find on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever platform you use are for entertainment. But increasingly, we're seeing podcasts and audio recordings being used as a way to communicate about the significance and relevance of collections in ways that are accessible to more people, and people who might not come and visit your archive or go to a museum or gallery. Is there a question there? No, that's all right. All right, so maybe if you have a think about some of these categories which might interest you and your archive and museum. Okay. Okay, so in the planning phase, we're going to be covering our goals, our ideas, and our audience. So we're going to plan for each aspects of these categories. Okay, so strategic goals and objectives. How can we make our goals and objectives for our interpretation or exhibitions activities align with our organisation's strategic mission? So if you're a school institution or educational institution, probably learning might be a big part of your work already. If you're in a private archive, or perhaps an archive for a private company, perhaps public relations is a really important thing for your organisation. So what I'd like you to think about is which of these goal categories might be most relevant to your context. And thinking about your strategic goals, where do you sit within your organisation? What's your organisation's overall mission, and how might that link with your objectives as an archivist in your organisation? So for the most part, from talking to different people, goals and strategic goals and objectives can fit into these categories, which makes it a bit easier for us to plan and gather momentum going forward. So public relations, so we might want to enhance community awareness of the collections or archive and raise the profile. Learning, so especially if you're from an educational context, we want to enhance opportunities for discovery and learning. We might want to attract new audiences through access, and we might want to also create relevant and engaging content. Quality is also a really important point, and in other contexts it's sometimes called significance, or it's mostly called significance or quality, and that's to be able to present your archive in a way that shows the care that you have over that archive as a whole. So that could be a strategic goal and objectives. So from each of these broad categories, you can develop your specific objectives for what you would like to achieve with your exhibitions or displays or other interpretive activities, depending on your context. You probably only need 2 or 3 strategic goals to focus on, because that's enough. So can I get a show of hands? How many people here are from a kind of a school context? Okay. How many from local government? Okay. And anybody else? What other contexts have we got?
Museums.
Museums? Yep. Up the back there.
Oh, National Archives.
National Archives, fantastic. So big archives, yep. Anyone else?
A club.
Club, excellent. Yeah, so community organisations, yep. Fantastic, excellent, great. So within all of these disciplines, we probably still have these types of goals in common with what we're trying to achieve with our community engagement approaches. So before I move on to the next slide, have a jot down of the ones that you think might be the most relevant to your context, because we'll come back to later. I'll just give you a few moments here. Okay, so now we've got some broad goals for what you'd like to achieve with your interpretation or exhibitions activities. We can look at how we might come up and generate ideas. So this is where the fun happens. So there's many different ways to look at your archive, excuse me, to generate ideas, to build your exhibitions and your public programs. So one way is you can look at your collection. What are the common themes, topics or ideas that are represented? You could look at the collection by format, so diaries, manuscripts, photographs. Perhaps individually those categories show you something that you could present. Maybe there's items from your archive that show chronology or change over time, which is a big theme in the curriculum. So if you're an educational or looking to expand your educational reach, that might be really relevant for you. There's also looking at the collection from geographical area and what that says about the items and the stories, or a specific collection originator. So perhaps a really big portion of your archive came from one or two really significant donors. Okay, you can also look at the collection from the lens of the market or popular culture. So here we've got, there's a lot of intrinsic human interests which interest most people regardless of whether they're interested in visiting a museum, archive or other institution. They love, money, crime and bodily functions. You can also look at, what your audience interests are as well, if you know any particular topics which are of interest to your community. You can also look at what's missing from your collection, as sometimes this can reveal the most interesting discussions and sometimes the most interesting displays that can also become collection opportunities for you as well. So I put the image there of the toilet paper diary that we have at the State Library of WA because, believe it or not, that is toilet paper. Oh, wow. So this is the diary of Raymond Stanley Stewart, who was a prisoner of war in World War II. And while he was in a prisoner of war camp, he composed this very lengthy diary on rolls of toilet paper. So this is what I would describe as quite a social object. There's not many people that I've met who haven't been intrigued or interested in an object like this. So you might not have a toilet paper diary in your archive, but have a think about some of those items which might almost have a social or intrinsic value or interest in your collection. So there's so much to talk about here. We've got it almost looks like it could be brown paper. So you've even got things like the substance. How has toilet paper changed over time as well, which is indeed rather fascinating. Here's another one that I'll come back to a little bit later. So this is a family Bible from the 17th century. And not 17th century, 1800s rather. And inside we found locks of hair. Surprise! Opened up the Bible, hair comes out. So if you're familiar with family Bibles, often they were used to store locks of hair of passed away loved ones or babies, first hair, things like that. So hair, very interesting to most people. Yes, sure.
Is that a label on that?
That is, yes. So that's unfortunate that is there in that photo. And not ideal, because obviously the adhesive can be quite damaging to the object. I'm not quite sure why we wouldn't have removed that before displaying it. This display was about 2017, so it was possibly put on at a stage in its life journey at the library, and traditionally You'll see a lot of red stamps on library books, which to conservators' nightmares, and big kind of laminated kind of labels, things like that. So it probably wasn't removed at the time because removing it might have caused more damage to the item, unfortunately. But not necessarily the case for everything. Okay, so where else can we get more ideas? So you could ask your audiences what they're interested in. That might be a bit revolutionary. There's also other government documents, such as the Victorian government has a document called the Audience Atlas, which describes cultural audiences by kind of what they call culture segments. And there'll be a bit more about audiences in Kelly's presentation a bit later today, so I won't go into that in too much detail. But there's documents out there. Obviously, the ABS has a lot of statistics as well about the people in your area. You can also look at documents such as the Historic Themes Framework. Has anybody heard of that? Yeah? And you have? Yeah?
20 years old.
Yes, very, very old.
It's great.
Yeah, still very useful. Very hard to find on the internet right now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, when I searched the other day. Anyway, very old document, but can provide a framework to help you contextualise your collections and your archive within national and state significant activities and developments. So very useful document, very old, but the interesting thing now is a lot of local councils are taking that information and using it to develop their own, plan for the interpretation of the history of their local area. So I've seen City of South Perth has produced one recently which looks to be based on this Historic Themes Framework. So if you Google Historic Themes Framework, you'll see that come up. So looking at other GLAM institutions, libraries, galleries, archives, museums, to see what you can offer that is different. So it's really easy when I look at other people's exhibitions and displays. I go, I wish I could have done that, or I don't have that much money, or, it's really easy to be put off, and then you can feel a little bit low about it. But I would really encourage you to look at what others are doing, to understand what you can offer that is special or different, because there's always going to be something, and that will be your unique selling point or your USP, to use marketing jargon. Okay, so you also need to plan your audience. And as I mentioned, there's different approaches to audience segmentation. Obviously, the obvious ones are demographic, age, things like that, but you might have particular interest groups that connect with your organisation. So you need to think about, who they are, what are their behaviours, and actually describe them. It can be a really useful project to describe everything you know about your different audiences. Also, what their level of influence is in the actual topic that you're going to present in your exhibition. Excuse me. All right. So, this example, so this gentleman here is from a little exhibition that I worked on. I chose this exhibition because it was quite a small exhibition, in that it had small in kind of library terms, which would be like 2 showcases with a couple of different objects and some photographs and some interpretive panels. And this exhibition was all about presenting and sharing the story of the world track laying world record, which was in 1968 in the Pilbara, when a group of Torres Strait Islander workers, men, were brought down from the Torres Strait into Western Australia to work for BHP's predecessor, called something else at the time, and they were laying the railroads for mining, essentially, and they were so fast that they broke a world record. So we are fortunate at the library to have a collection of photographs from BHP, which actually documents the railroad making. And this gentleman here, as you can see, that's him there. So looking, it was fantastic we were able to get in touch with him. So connecting with those originators that relate to your collection is one way to bring more information and increase the richness of the stories that you're sharing and presenting. So, a useful tool in deciding, okay, we've got some donors or perhaps the people that are featured in the photographs. How do we decide on what level of participation that they are going to have in the project? And this is a document that you can download from the internet. It's called the IAP2 Spectrum of Public Participation. And as you can see, the level of impact that people have on their decision increases with inform to empower. So a document like this can be really useful in helping you set expectations. So one of the challenges that you might be familiar with working in this space is that you might be displaying a collection that relates to a particular community or a particular community histories, stories. And you want to be able to set expectations about how you're going to work with them or not work with them. Maybe you're only going to inform them. So this can help you decide how you will collaborate, or maybe you don't have capacity to collaborate at that stage, in which case you would be informing and communicating. Okay, so there's copies of that document at the back there, so please feel free to pick up one. You can learn about this whole framework in a 3-day training session just on that table. So there's a lot there that can be unpacked, but I'm just showing it to you for context. So this is an example of the audience and stakeholder mapping that we've looked at for the World Track Playing World Record exhibition. So obviously there are more stakeholders than I've listed here, but just to provide you with comparison. So we had Torres Strait Islander community and descendants of the World Track Playing World Record. We knew that they were going to attend the exhibition in their family groups, and it was really important for them to bring their kids to show them, to convey, the story and the history. We knew that the goal for them, after talking with them, that they just wanted their experiences and stories to be faithfully represented. So after looking at that spectrum, we decided that their level of influence and involvement was high, because they're very relevant to the content, being the subjects of the photographs and having an ongoing relationship with that story. So that we were going to consult them. In a really ideal world, we would want to empower them, but resources are always limited. Okay, so we also had the executives from BHP. So they were a little bit removed from the stories and the context. So our decision was we were going to still keep them informed, but they didn't have as much say, obviously, as the people who are pictured in the photographs. Okay, so I've got a handout for you, just on the table. It's actually a table on the table. Yep, that's it. Yeah. So on one side there's text, and the other side is a bit of a table. So unfortunately the lines on it didn't print out very dark. So sorry about that. But there's meant to be lines visible. Okay. So interpretive media matrices. So this is a useful tool for identifying how you might convey different types of themes relating to your collection or your archive. And so you might choose, audio tour, behind the scenes tour, exhibition or displays. And these are just some mock themes that I've developed for the library. But you can see how multiple themes can be interpreted with different types of formats. So what might be useful for your organisation or archive is that you might like to do this to plan out your activities, maybe for the year, maybe 6 months, depending on, it might be just you in the archive, in which case, you might like to choose 1 or 2 themes to explore for the year and to explore them in some different ways. So think back to that table about the different types of methods and which might be accessible to you. If we were doing a big exhibition, such as an exhibition that you see here, there would be different interpretive media for different themes within the one exhibition. So you might have text panel maybe we have object display, photograph display. So it can be used in different kind of ways, just a useful tool. Okay, so scoping and exhibition parameters. So what kind of in-person and in-kind contributions might you be able to access from within your organisation? And what support might you be able to leverage through new partnerships and relationships? So can I get a sense of, is mostly everybody here the kind of the lone archivist in your context? Yeah. So in your organisation, you're probably already very familiar with developing your own allies and people that can help you with different aspects of your work. So the way we can often keep costs low for exhibitions and displays is by finding those people within our organisation that can actually assist with different aspects of the work. So your organisation, might have maybe it has a media department, maybe it doesn't, maybe there's somebody with graphic design skills, maybe there's a maintenance man, depending on whatever context you are in, there could be helpers within your organisation. Okay, so we've had a look at the media matrix, stakeholder mapping. So Gantt charts. So this is a tool that you would have seen in different aspects of your work, I'm sure, to plan exhibitions and projects. Obviously, this is for quite a large exhibition project. There's lots of different tasks. It relates specifically to the library context. But if you're doing multiple exhibitions, maybe multiple little displays, maybe it's a little showcase that you have, buy something, you might like to change that over several times a year. You might like to actually plan those changeovers through a tool like the Gantt chart. And there's many templates that are downloadable on the internet. So find one that suits you. Or a lot of my colleagues like to use the features of Microsoft SharePoint, such as there's a planner app through that, which can be really helpful. So making your money go further. So we've discussed what resources can you obtain in kind through mutually beneficial partnerships. So your network, all of the people here can help you. You can share information and ideas, and where possible, it might be possible to share some resources. So you might have zero budget for exhibitions and displays. You might have $100, you might have $500. If you're really lucky, you'll have $50,000, but that doesn't happen at the library or a lot of larger institutions anyway. So the key is to make it scalable. So your biggest expenses are usually going to be obviously your expertise. That's an expense to your organisation, but usually we can sort of forget about that. Graphic design and production are usually the biggest costs. So if you can find someone in your organisation that likes graphic design or that likes doing that, you can definitely get some support there. Otherwise, you can outsource, or if you're really keen or just really don't have much support, you can try using tools such as Canva. There's some free online tools, basically kind of Microsoft Publisher for the current age. All right, so display inventories. I don't need to tell you how to document your collections because you already know how to do that. But this is a document that I would often produce if I was working with an external designer to basically share with them what we were planning for the exhibition so that they could then produce a design that really reflected the exhibition goals and themes. So this is for an exhibition that we're currently working on, which you can see later in the year. Okay, so research. Again, I don't need to tell you how to do your research because you're all research and archive professionals. But I just wanted to mention that with exhibitions projects, it's really helpful to categorise your research into three kind of subsets. So you've got your cultural soup research, which I could describe cultural soup as what's going on in relation to that topic or theme or idea, and kind of put it all in a brainstorm, and that's your kind of context for what's been done on this project or this idea or this concept before. So for our cultural soup, for the truck laying world record exhibition, we worked out that there was an exhibition many years ago in Queensland, so we called them up and asked them what that was about. So find your information. And that's, again, to establish what your difference is and what your offering is. So you're going to do thematic research, which is the contextual information and the broad ideas which will form the basis for your framework and the storyline that you might develop with, say, several items for display. And you'll also have your object-specific research relating to documents, archives, photographs, etc. So for the purpose of object-specific research, some might look at, this as a single object. But, okay, great, we're moving on to questions. So we'd want to be able to bring all of this information together in a project brief or pitch. And there's some categories here that we need to look at. Okay, so developing and design. So as I mentioned, we spent most of our time in the planning phase. So there is a diagram that I will email you all, which goes through different phases and provides an indication of some of the key activities. Obviously, again, this is all very scalable. So you're going to also need to look at your curatorial approach. Are we going to have an organisation-led curatorial approach, which the institution and voice tells a story? Or are we going to have the voice of community entirely, in which you hand over total control of your exhibition space or display area to an external organisation? And as you can see, there's a continuum of community input and also a continuum of trust. Do we entirely trust a separate organisation or institution to take over our space and present it? Okay, so we need to look at tone, things like that, voice, active or passive. I'll come back to these points in the next session, which will discuss our exhibition captions and texts. I'll also come back to this slide as well. But for now, I've reached our time. So we've got some opportunities for questions. Any questions? Yes?
Well, it's not necessarily related, but when you get very good at this and have all your display material
Yes.
and then you're finished with it,
Yes.
and you're a very small place, do people sort of go, God, we've got this lavishly produced beautiful stuff, we don't want to just bin it?
Yes.
What does one do in those situations?
Yeah, so...
What different approaches do people have? Do you just chuck it
Yeah.
or put it somewhere and, I'd like to know about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's many different options, and it really depends on how you produce your exhibition. So, if you use materials that are one time only, usually, unfortunately, it might go to trash. But there's many opportunities to, collaborate with other organisations and institutions to even, see if they want to host your little display or little exhibition to extend the life of it. And obviously that could be an opportunity for you to get your statistics and your audience, expand your reach as well. So I think it really depends on what your objectives for the project are, and if you want it to have a longer life. Build that into your planning and start having those conversations quite early, because there might be, you're at the City of Armidale, there might be a local history house or a building that it might be suitable to display in, that you can extend the life of it that way. Welcome to anybody else's input.
Alphabetical order.
What's that?
I store mine in alphabetical order.
Beautiful.
By sort of
Yeah.
theme titles.
Yeah.
And I've even got a thesaurus of my titles.
Yes.
I admit to that.
That's great.
And then I'm developing so I do a monthly display.
Great.
On all different themes and topics.
Beautiful.
In the public library.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm I change it up.
Yeah.
So March, International Women's Day. Next March, I'm not doing the same display. I'm adding to it. And so I've got a repository of displays. Does that make sense? And so I've been doing them for years in a row.
Wow.
So then
Yeah.
I've got photos of what I did, say, 2018.
Amazing.
How different it was in 2019, how it was different in 2020, you know what I mean?
Great.
So adding more women to it, or just doing a big display on one woman.
Yeah.
I've got more info.
Great.
So
It sounds like you're really building it.
Recycling my display.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yes, Mark.
Karina, can I ask about accessibility, because that seems to be growing in importance.
Yes.
And people who have sight or hearing disability, how do you plan for all that? How important is it in what you're doing now?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yeah, there's guidelines. So I find I'll send you around the link to it, or you can Google it. It's Smithsonian Guidelines for Accessible Museums. So that's quite a comprehensive guide. I haven't found an Australian equivalent as it relates to specifically the museum context, but there probably is. I think planning there's simple ways to enable accessibility. So you're thinking about the readability of your text. You're thinking about the design of your object labels, having enough contrast, the design of your panels. So ensuring that there's enough, there's not text kind of over backgrounds or things that might make it harder for people to read or understand. I think there's also, different types of standards in terms of showcases and how high they are to be off the ground in order to be accessible from a seating position, such as a wheelchair. So the Smithsonian Guide is actually really comprehensive. I think increasingly we're trying to look at other ways of providing access to information. So text obviously is not the only way to communicate information about an exhibition storyline. We could look at simple audio tools, or you've probably been to different organisations where there's no labels on the walls. It might be you might get just a headset. So looking at different ways to make it accessible for different types of people. But I think one of the really useful things that you can do is just try and talk to as many people as possible. Is there a regular who comes into your organisation that has a disability? Have a chat to them and see what's meeting their needs and what isn't, because I think it's those conversations that can really influence your practice as a cultural heritage practitioner and as in the archives sector. Any other questions? Yeah? Mm-hmm.
Everyone has questions.
Yes.
When you're using Indigenous content, do you
Yes.
firstly engage with an elder or someone who has some information about ownership and
Yes.
sensitive interpretation?
Absolutely, yeah, that's such a good question, and it's really good that in all of the GLAM sector is sort of moving to a space where, with all of our collections, we're trying to go back to the originators for more information, because historically that hasn't been done, and things have been kept at at libraries, archives, museums, and they've become really disconnected from the communities from which they originated. And we're moving towards a practice where we're having those conversations a lot earlier, which is really great. So what I would recommend in that situation is, depending on where you're situated, your local council might have a local elders group that you could get in touch with to ask for some advice. Another good thing is for your organisation, if you don't already have some cultural competency training, there's training courses that your organisation and your staff can do. I think the important thing is to, where possible, ask first and take that approach. But sometimes it can be hard to know if, it's got this photo, it's depicting some, Aboriginal elders, they're, maybe from Pilbara, or might not have much information about the photograph, and sometimes, or the item, and sometimes it might be difficult to know where to start. And I think That's where developing some relationships or looking at what relationships your institution or organisation might already have and other people internally that you might be able to ask some advice for. So we are quite lucky at the library in that we have an Indigenous liaison officer. So obviously I work with them quite a bit, but that's a kind of a luxury that not everybody has. So I think the important thing is to try and develop some of those localised networks, develop those friendships, and ultimately it's just a case of everybody's human and people like to be asked. Any other questions? But that's a really good point, and we could do a whole session on on engaging specifically with Aboriginal communities. I probably wouldn't be the person to deliver that as a non-Aboriginal person, but it's still definitely worth talking further about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's it? Yeah, okay, great. So I've got some slides here, thank you so much, that we'll come back to in the next presentation that I'll do, which will be on how to write and develop your text labels. So we'll be looking at some different formats for that. So thank you so much. I wish I had longer because I could talk for ages, but hopefully there's a panel discussion later today. So if there's any questions that are unanswered, please write them down and save them for later. Thank you so much.